France did not have a great time in the first half of the 20th century, but in Kaiserreich, things are a lot worse for them. Communists overthrew the Third Republic, and the people of the old regime desperately fled to the African colonies to set up a government in exile, and gained the strength to reclaim the mainland one day from the communists. Well, it's been over a decade since then, and nothing has happened. It's 1936, and it's time to get to work. We have no democracy, no stability, and a majority of the people we rule over want us dead. But France can still overcome it all. So, let's start with the focus tree. It's pretty sizable, with the main choice being if you actually want to bring democracy back to France. But at the start, the main priority is stabilizing our remaining colonies. A big problem for exiled France is limited manpower, and I'm forced to use a bunch of it on garrison duties for our colonies. Well, modern problems require modern solutions, so I outsource a bunch of those jobs to Indians to free up men for the front line. There is also a power struggle between two commanders in the Republic, Henry Mordac and Charles de Gaulle. They have different ideas on why France lost the war and what to do differently this time. Mordac is a talented infantry commander who blames an out-of-touch leadership for losing the war, so he wants to completely reorganize the military structure. De Gaulle, on the other hand, claims that France lost due to subversive elements in the country and is more of a fan of using armor to make big sweeping maneuvers. He imagines himself commanding large tank offensives, most likely due to him playing a lot of this video's sponsor, War Thunder. Couldn't blame him. If you want a vehicle combat game, this is the peak, since there are over 2,000 tanks, ships, planes, and helis you can use to fight real players around the world. War Thunder doesn't slack with the details on them because they are modeled down to the individual components with a damage model built with them in mind. That means the game doesn't need an overall health bar for your tank, but just tracks the status of your components and crew to determine if you can still fight. When you shoot an enemy or get hit by one, the game even shows you an x-ray of what damage that shell did to your vehicle, which I personally think is super cool that there is that much attention to detail. Your skill level coming in doesn't matter much because you'll find a place to have fun here, since the game is built for players ranging from try-hard sweat lords to dads trying to relax from their 9 to 5. So, if this sounds interesting to you, you can try the game for free on PC, Xbox Series X or S, or PlayStation 5 by using my link below in the description, or pinned comment, which gives new players, or players who haven't played in at least 6 months, a large bonus pack with premium vehicles, premium account access, some drip for your ride, and a bit extra because you're just that special, but it's only for a limited time. Anyways, back to France. Pétain saw that France needed some radical change to ever have a chance to recover and threw his support behind Mordac. One of his last acts as the leader of France was to start a massive infrastructure project to link northern and western Africa with a railway to unite the country and make movement between the two regions easier. He promoted Mordac to Field Marshal to prepare him to take the reins of the country, and soon stepped down, making a speech urging the people to support Mordac's new government. Still, people didn't like Mordac since he wanted to change the structure of the military so radically, making Pétain come out again and tell them to sit down, shut up, and enjoy the ride. Democracy was coming back to France, locking us to the liberal tree, but Mordac had gone too far for some. France has fallen. Again. De Gaulle and his supporters marched into Algiers and took over the palace of government, soon sending out a message that everyone should remain calm because the patriots were in control. To his shock, the people were not responsive to his message and he was arrested for treason. Now it was time to look outwards a bit. I joined the IEDC, which gives me very powerful economic buffs in exchange for some political power, and soon the Spanish Civil War started, which I would intervene in, of course. The Carlists were probably expecting more, but I'm not a charity. I have my own problems to deal with. Still, it was a team effort and I was doing my part. I was encircling enemy units and disrupting the enemy front lines enough that the Kingdom of Spain was actively collapsing to the Carlists. Unfortunately, my support was interrupted by a rebellion in Africa. To put it simply, I made a mistake. By giving the really rebellious people of Chad local autonomy, the resistance there got the strength needed to finally declare independence. I had a lot of time to subdue the rebels at least, and since I'm at war now, I can beg more from my allies to give me the men and guns needed to garrison the colonies. The rebels were no stronger than a militia, so it wasn't hard for a professional army to beat them in battle and re-secure the area. And with this little rebellion defeated, resistance in Chad became significantly easier to deal with. I would return to Carlist Spain, and looking at the state of the American Civil War, I decided the Pacific states would be our best bet for the Entente. At least I was allowed to send a lot more people there, even got the whole Entente squad to pull up and save democracy in America. While we traveled to the front line, the Trans-Saharan Railway finished, linking both regions of Africa, allowing me to use these straight crossings. With all our volunteers deployed, it was time to get to work. Despite having one volunteer for the car list, he was gonna hard carry and took Zaragoza. Meanwhile in America, our 3 volunteers were making moves in the Midwest. But it seems my arrival in Spain broke the communist ability to fight, because the volunteer was just able to walk unobstructed into Barcelona. There was now a war between the Dominion of India and Communist India that the Entente really wanted me to get involved with, but they looked like they were doing fine, so they didn't need me. But then the Spanish Civil War ended, and I figured I might as well just help out. The war was pretty much won. I just showed up to train my Special Forces general against the remaining Indian troops. It only lasted for 2 more months before the Communist Indians finally surrendered. The only thing left to do was focus all my energy on helping the PSA win the American Civil War. I was dedicated to helping them. That's why I sent them all this equipment despite not having much myself. Their main threat was the communists, so I focused hard on their army, making encirclement after encirclement after encirclement in the Midwest, helping them push to the Mississippi. Unfortunately, the CSA was able to lock down control of the eastern US, killing the Feds and the Union State. This left them with a clear industrial advantage over the PSA, and I don't think my Lend-Lease was making up for it. The PSA started collapsing in the south soon afterwards, and with major wars popping off around the globe, I figured this was where I should get off and reclaim my homeland. Fortunately, since we won the Spanish Civil War, we had a great place to station our army to invade the Commune of France. Still had to push past the Pyrenees Mountains, but at least there were places that aren't nearly impossible to push. The Germans invited us to a conference to work together to defeat the Third Internationale, but when they suggest I'd have to renounce my claim on Alsace-Lorraine to work together, that agreement was out the window. Checking in on the PSA, I see that they're being pushed all the way back to the Rockies, so while I may have been very late on this, I finally cut my losses with my investment. Those weapons were better kept here, cause I could put them to better use by actually winning, starting with slowly breaking the Pyrenees line. Soon, I felt I had penetrated their lines enough to go for a bigger prize, the city of Bordeaux. Sadly, I could not get that city in my initial offensive, but I could cope with the fact that nearly the entire mountain range was cleared of communists, and their only response was to invade Sardinia of all places. By the time the last troops in the Pyrenees surrendered, the French had lost over 1 million men, and I know Spain's been kill stealing, so I'm just gonna say I killed over 600,000 of that. Taking Bordeaux was pretty easy after this. Not even the BF could save France. They tried to distract me with their naval invasion of Barcelona, but doing it right after I finished with the Bordeaux offensive did not lead to a good result for them. As I pushed further into France, manpower would become more of a problem due to all this new land I'd have to garrison, but luckily I could still outsource those jobs to Indians. Things were looking a bit too good for us with the Commune of France rapidly collapsing, so the game balanced it out by having America join the Third Internationale. A move Canada somehow never expected because there are no units in the country to defend against America. But while Canada may not have an army in their homeland, the Commune of France barely has an army left to defend their land as well. The random nations that they were relying on to hold their front line were not going to stop me from getting to Paris. Of course, I managed to get to Paris first, and with that, the Commune of France is on their deathbed. The KD ratio was looking really solid, field hospitals really doing their part in the war. Now all I had to do was take the remaining major VPs so the country would capitulate, and I could move on to the next stage. So after 20 minutes of figuring out what went wrong, I came to the conclusion that the compatibility of certain mods I was using may have been a bit exaggerated, liar, and bugged out some peace deal. The only way for me to keep this campaign going was to using the console to annex the Commune of France and putting the Entente back at war with the Third Internationale. Not the ideal situation, but this was the best I could do to salvage the save. At least I could get back to playing properly. I had to reintegrate all the mainland territories, and to do that, I was gonna teach the French people to hate communism and love capitalism again. The socialist Italians were still fighting on, but they weren't exactly Spartans. It wasn't long before they were forced to surrender too. Italy wasn't the only nation surrendering now. Canada had fallen to Red America, but they weren't going to be forgotten. I figured it'd be best to focus on securing Europe though, so the British Isles were the obvious next target. I prepared my invasion of Cornwall while Ireland was handled by the others. My navy is a lot worse than the British and American fleet, so I have to wait for the right opportunity. Once it arrives, I launch the invasions in a way to make them land at the same time, but the Americans deploy their fleet in the channel again, so I couldn't launch them all. Soon, I get a chance to launch some of the invasions, but they would directly hit the port, and I just decide to roll the dice with what I can send. That landing was not easy. Submarines caught half the divisions going overseas, and the survivors just gotta make do with what survived. At least we had a fleet around to defend the supply convoys. We just needed the fuel to keep that fleet running, and, well, guess I don't need that extra fuel so much now. Despite this, I'm able to keep pushing. I guess the starving Frenchmen weren't considered as much of a threat to Britain as the Germans who landed in the north. The British were pretty desperate at this point, pulling in all the units they could from abroad to hold the line, and the Americans made a hasty invasion of Portugal to distract me. The British were close to dying, so even though I'd lose a lot of men to convoy raiding, I sent more divisions over to keep up the offensive. We may have been outnumbered, but I had green air to keep me going. With me occupying the south and Germany occupying the north, the country was forced to give up. When the peace deal happened, I was able to take southern England and Wales, but most importantly, I had a navy I could use again. The monarchy may have been kicked out of Canada, but at least they could return to their home in London. So Germany had finished off their main threats with the end of Britain, France, and finally Russia, so I figured they weren't going to do much at this point. Still, I needed to deal with America, and a good way to start was to get a base in the Caribbean and South America from some misguided Latin American nations who had declared war on me. Colombia was the leader of the Andean pack, so I could just slam a bunch of Marines into them, and my cast would guide those soldiers to all the major Colombian cities, making the whole faction surrender to me. I realized after this, America would not be as hard to take down as I initially thought, since nobody in their country wanted to fight. All I had to do once I landed was take the important cities in the east and they'd surrender. You could really tell the Americans were sick of war with this half-hearted defense they put up for their capital. It's gotta be embarrassing to be losing to a country that was a barely functioning state a decade ago. Guess the American Navy just doesn't care about the war either. I was able to ship more armies and supplies to the country, and they even bothered trying to raid me to stop me. So now thousands of French troops are going to be walking through the industrial heartland of the country. By the time I reach Chicago, America's nearly ready to tap out. I just needed to secure some more of the Midwest before the commies were finally ready to throw in the towel. The Third Internationale was gone for good. There was still the matter of the occupation of Alsace-Lorraine, and I wasn't gonna let that issue stand for much longer. The Germans were looking pretty scary, especially with that air force, which easily outnumbered mine. But hopefully, since they didn't have many troops near our border, I'd be able to quickly seize a bunch of their industry before they could sufficiently respond. When I declared the war, Belgium was the first target since they stuck out so much. When they were taken care of, the Rhineland was the next objective. This did not go nearly as well as expected, due to problems like the Germans actually having troops and planes to fight back. While on the ground, combat stalled into a stalemate, there was still constant fighting in the skies between me and Germany. Despite having more planes, I was still holding my own because my fighters were higher quality, so I could slowly whittle the German Air Force down. This was only possible because I could get the rubber needed for my plane production from Germany's allies, who I guess had more important things to do than help the leader of their own alliance. I would humiliate Germany further by taking out their prize colony in Middle Africa when I realized you only need to take one city to capitulate them. By June 1945, the Luftwaffe was falling off hard. They were now at similar numbers to my Air Force, so I felt comfortable using the cast I had also been producing to start targeting their logistics to make holding the front line even harder for them. I also realized that I should have been trying to blockade Germany this whole time, so they can't get their own rubber to build their own planes. Since the British had proven themselves incapable of fighting the Scots, I had to send my army from Africa to help them out. I just don't get how they struggled so much with them. All I had to do was outnumber them 3-1 and they fell apart. Once I took care of them, I had to figure out a new plan to kill Germany, because pushing across the Rhine was just not working out, considering how little I'd progressed. But I noticed my allies had landed in Denmark, and I got an idea of a daring naval invasion that would kill many Reichspakt divisions and blow open a whole new front. With complete air supremacy in CAS, the operation went off perfectly. The Reichspakt armies were surrounded and eliminated in Denmark, and I could keep up this momentum to link up with the other armies in the west. The German army was in complete disarray from this, and couldn't stop the first link up in the Ruhr, trapping a whole army in the Netherlands. But it only get worse from there, with me able to do another pincer to trap even more units in the Ruhr area. Because of that initial invasion, the German army ceased to be an effective fighting force within 5 months. The remainder of the German army tried to put up a fight for the remainder of their country, but the fall of Berlin was inevitable. Do want to give a special shout out to all the Reichspakt nations that saw this ongoing war and decided that they had better things to do. Not sure if I could have gotten this far if they did get involved. Russia did get involved, and was considered a major, so after I capped Germany, I had to go on the long march to take care of them as well. But they weren't hard to deal with because they had already lost one war recently. They clearly didn't have enough time to be ready for this next one. So the peace deal triggered with their capitulation, and I would do my best to get some good post-war borders. So it took 11 years, but France was back and even bigger than it was before. Communism had been defeated and liberalism prevailed over Europe, with France as the strongest European power. I hope you guys enjoyed this campaign, and thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Remember, you can click my link down below to get a bunch of goodies for new and returning players, and enjoy the game on PC, Xbox Series X or S, PlayStation 5, or previous gen consoles. Shout out to my alumni too, who generously support me on Patreon and fund me role-playing my wild political fantasies. Anyways, enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see y'all again.